So, good evening. I'm Julián Zugazagoitia, the Director and CEO of the Nelson-Atkins, and on behalf of our Board of Trustees, on behalf of our Board Chair, Shirley Bush-Hellsberg, and in the presence of our great leader, Henry Bloch, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight. It is part of the celebrations of the Bloch Galleries that we opened a few weeks ago, and it is continuing the various public programs and the various dimensions. And today we have a very special and scholarly program in the presence with Joachim Pissarro and Rick Brettell, two great colleagues and scholars that will bring this collection to light and put it in perspective. But I want, again, to remind you what this incredible gift has been for the Nelson. It is not only the gift of 29 masterpieces that come and become part of the collection with their sisters and brother paintings that were already in the collection, but it was also more than 96,000 works of manpower to transform those galleries into perhaps the most modern, the most up-to-date galleries in the US, both technologically, both by the display, by the lighting system. So we can really be proud of saying that everything is up to date in Kansas City. And we have a lot of good friends from Texas visiting. So we're very happy about that. And I know Henry really enjoys our quantitative data. So in the 2.5 months since we're open, we had received more than 48,000 visitors. So definitely at the end of the year, this will spike our numbers. And it is really something that gives me a lot of pride, is that someone in his lifetime, his philanthropy and the difference he's making into this community, not only is felt by all of us, but that he's here with us to see it, and he's coming to every program that we're doing. And the challenge when we're doing so many openings and so many programs and so many events, he says, Julián, will you be up to do all of them? And I said, only if you come. And he has been here ever since. But just to share one last anecdote, I remember exactly almost a year ago, I had my summer break and I went for a few weeks to Europe and then came back. And at that time we had bi-weekly meetings of all the team that was doing construction. And Henry is calling me for not having been present at the last meetings. He says, Julián, where were you? It's like, still I do have to take some vacations just in order to recharge the energy. So I missed the last, let me put you up to date. We've done this, we've done that, this is already. So he was really on top of this project, and it is your commitment and your intense pride on the Nelson-Atkins that made us achieve what we can achieve. But it is really my pleasure. I'm going to introduce one of our newest curators who will have the honor of introducing our guests tonight. But before I do that, I do recommend that we have a very few copies of this incredible Pissarro book that is co-authored by our two guests today. So I encourage you to, at the conclusion of this lecture, to run to the store, fight for the few copies that we have, and then intercept them. Then we'll be very gladly to sign them. So thank you. And now, please, help me in welcoming our newest curator, and she is in charge of all of our European art, Amy Marcel de Galland. So please welcome Amy.
Thank you, Julián. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce our guest speakers this evening, who have given me short shrift to call it the Rick and Joe show. So I think we're really in for a treat. If I really went into all of their accolades and all their accomplishments, it would only be me talking up here this evening. So I will also do short shrift because they are very distinguished and accomplished individuals. Richard Brettell is among the foremost authorities in the world on Impressionism and French painting in the period 1830 to 1930. With 3 degrees from Yale University, he has taught at the University of Texas, Northwestern University, the University of Chicago, Yale University, and Harvard. He is currently the Vice Provost of the University of Texas at Dallas, as well as the Margaret McDermott Distinguished Chair of Art and Aesthetic Studies in the interdisciplinary program in Arts and Humanities at the University of Texas at Dallas, as well as the founding director of the Edith O'Donnell Institute of Art History, which is housed at the University of Texas at Dallas in the Dallas Museum of Art. He is an international museum consultant with projects in Europe, Asia, and the United States, and he has been appointed the director of the Paul Gauguin Catalogue Raisonné that Wildenstein is working on in Paris, and was named the Commander des Arts et des Lettres by the French Minister of Culture for the work he accomplished with FRAME, French Regional American Museum Exchange. Since 2015, he's the art critic for the Dallas Morning News, and he was recently honored with the first Brettell Award in the Arts. The first recipient of this award of $150,000, made possible by the generosity of Mrs. Margaret McDermott, is the famous landscape architect Peter Walk. This award recognizes a lifetime of excellence in the arts in all fields and will be given biennially. Joachim Pissarro, as many of you may wonder, is indeed related to the artist Pissarro, whom they will discuss this evening, among other artists. He has been the editorial director of the Wildenstein publication in America since 2002 and is currently the Bechad Professor of Art History and the director of the Hunter College Galleries, Hunter College, New York, since 2007. Born in France, as I mentioned, he is related to the artist Camille Pissarro, with degrees, now went back to Joachim, with degrees from the Sorbonne, the Courtauld Institute in London, and the University of Texas at Austin. He has taught at Yale University and held visiting professors and lecture positions at Melbourne University in Sydney, Queensland Art Gallery in Brisbane, UT Austin, and Yeshiva University in New York. He's held several curatorial positions, serving as the curator of painting and sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Seymour K. H. Knox Jr., curator of European and Contemporary Art at the Yale University Art Gallery, and the chief curator at the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth from 1997 to 2000. He has curated a wide range of exhibitions and co-authored many, many publications, as well as being the single author. He is the co-author of the Catalogue Raisonné of the work of Camille Pissarro, published by the Wildenstein Institute, and he recently worked on a publication with one of my major professors, David Carrier, called Wild Art. Released in October 2013, it features 10 chapters about 50 works of art, showcasing alternative art genres such as street art, food art, minuscule art, ice, and sand sculptures, something sure to check out. He's written on Van Gogh, Pissarro, Cézanne, Monet, all of which I think are going to fold into tonight's discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Richard Brettell and Joachim Pissarro.
The most important part, a little bit of self-lubrication. I'm Rick, and
I'm Joe.
And I'm Pissarro.
And I'm Brettell.
So we exchange identities. We haven't done this for 15 years. About 15 years ago, we were in Portland, Oregon, and we were asked to give a lecture together in a huge Masonic temple in this room where there were 2,000 people. And we hadn't rehearsed like we haven't rehearsed tonight. And it was the most amazing thing. And so this is our second time.
Absolutely. May I just say a few words about where we are tonight? Thank, of course, our host, Julian, Amy, and all your extraordinary team. Can I also turn to Mr. Bloch, whom Rick and I met many years, several decades ago, when the collection was still in formation. We came to Mission Hills on several occasions. Eventually, Rick Brettell invited me to write a few entries on your collection, and it was one of the most moving times of my life. But I'd like to reflect on what my memories of Kansas City was like that it was the mid-80s, mid-80s to early 90s, possibly. And I haven't been since at least the early 90s. So we're talking 25, 30 years almost. And it's such an extraordinary transformation. And I have to say, the team at the museum, your leadership, your support, Mr. Bloch, and everybody probably in this room, and you really need to hear it very, very profoundly, sincerely, and I'd like to raise applause for the most incredible contributions.
Absolutely.
I'm sure Rick will soon pick up on this. I was wondering about, the presence of the Bloch collection within this institution and how it relates, how Impressionism, these artists that Rick has worked on, he's indeed, you're absolutely right, one of, in my opinion, the world's most acclaimed specialist on the field, how Impressionism relates to this institution and to Kansas City at large. I know Rick will have some hard facts, some stats, which I'm sure you will find fascinating. But I was just there, going down from the museum, following the meander, as Julian invited me to do, with looking at the Stephen Hall architecture, and ending up at the very bottom of the gardens with this glorious-looking commission by Robert Morris, who happens to be an old friend of mine. In his mid-80s, I saw him last week. He's having an exhibition in New York at Barbara Castelli, going as strong as ever, as grumpy as ever, but just being the genius that I know he is. And that labyrinth, if you haven't seen it, it really is absolutely spectacular. And I was looking down at the way people are going down with their family, their strollers, and I thought, this is it. We are in an Impressionist garden. This is the life that these guys we're going to talk about tonight managed to conjure up through their paintings 150 years ago. You have it. You have managed to create something really out of this world. The type of cosmopolitan museums we know, Paris, New York, might as well say, forget it. This is, you really have it.
It's true, and even a plane full of Texans have to, we all drove through the city and went to see Thomas Hart Benton's house and went through a few beautiful neighborhoods and thought, why don't we move? Anyway, we've just been collaborating, actually, on an exhibition which is up now in Paris at the Musée de Luxembourg. And the Musée de Luxembourg was the old Museum of Modern Art in Paris, and it was the first place where a Pissarro was shown in a public place, in a French National Museum in the 19th century, in a room that was called the Salle Caillebotte. It was the room of Caillebotte's collection, given to the nation after Caillebotte's death and fixed up in 1898. So during Pissarro's lifetime, his first paintings in a museum in France were in this Musée de Luxembourg, which is now a temporary exhibition gallery. So we decided to do, in less than a year, not advisable, in less than a year, an exhibition about the one phase of Pissarro's career that even neither of us had really focused on, which are the last 20 years of his life when he lived and worked in this little village called Erigny. And here he is in his studio, which he finally had the money to build a studio. He'd never had a studio. He's always painted in bedrooms and living rooms and out of doors and wherever he could work. And here he is finally in a studio. And this is his house. And there's the studio down at the bottom. And here he is with his family, and here he is working away. And what we were able to do in less than a year is to gather a group of about 40 paintings. We couldn't get the one in the Kansas City, in your museum, because of course you're opening the Bloch Gallery and you wouldn't lend it. So we were, slightly annoyed, but we'll get to that in a minute. But here is Pissarro's studio, and here are paintings that we have just sort of gathered together because Pissarro in Erigny was the anti-Monet. Rather than doing a kind of luxurious garden with all these flowers and all these wonderful things, he made a garden, his wife made the garden, which was a garden that you ate from, that you looked at, that was part of a whole cycle of life. And it was not just a pretty garden, it was a useful garden, a jardin protégé in French. And we loved doing this exhibition. We loved writing our essays in record time. And it's actually been, oddly enough, popular in Paris. And what we thought, this one is at the National Gallery in Washington. And this one
is
it's in Fukushima.
Fukushima.
Fukushima. It's from Japan. We had to raise quite a lot of money because the lady who runs the RMN wouldn't let us have pictures from Japan or Australia because they were too expensive to transport. And so we dialed for dollars and we got them.
Rick Brettell is a phenomenal fundraiser, for your information.
So what we thought we would do is to begin with Pissarro, because that's how we met. I did a Pissarro exhibition which opened in London in 1980. And Joachim and his mother came to the opening. And I'd never met a real Pissarro, though I'd written my dissertation on Pissarro. And there was this, we were each rather younger in those days.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Rick omits an important detail. He also wrote his PhD, one of the first major PhDs in America, written on Pissarro, with Bob Herbert and
Hansen.
Hansen. This was in the 1970s, and so this is Rick really put a cornerstone in the renewed scholarship on Pissarro. That is an important thing. I was trying to run away from my DNA, and I wanted to do my thesis on Carl André in London in the late 1970s. Just for your info, the Prime Minister Wilson had allowed the Tate to spend £12,000 on, by equivalent 7, known as the pile of bricks. And my subject was flatly denied, known as art criticism. So I turned to a modernist subject, and when I met Rick, in fact, thanks to Rick, I was given my first job in the museum world ever. He invited me to come to Chicago and introduced me, as he was one of the youngest curators, I think, ever in America, to the phenomenal collection of works of art of the Art Institute. And that's really how this long relationship started.
And then we found ourselves many years later standing in Henry Bloch's living room looking at this. And it is, if you've studied Pissarro through your life, you know his works very well, and we each know them really well. And this is a painting which is like no other painting he made. And what I thought I'd do, we decided to sort of go out from the paintings in the Bloch collection and in the Nelson-Atkins previous collection, and sort of suggest that one of the most interesting ways of doing exhibitions now is to do small, focused exhibitions which come from one work of art that you own and allow you to gather a small number of works of art around them that make them more interesting and give them a position in the history of modern art. And what's fascinating about this is there are a series of paintings painted by Pissarro which have never been gathered, all of which were painted in the same grove of chestnuts in Louveciennes. And so here you have 3 of them around the Bloch picture, and you can see that the Bloch picture is, it's unique. And I keep looking at all the other pictures for that damn tree that has that diagonal, and where is it, and did he invent it, and what did he do? And he also painted views a little bit away from this same forest. The one on the right is in the Art Institute of Chicago. It's one of his few paintings on wood, and it's because he didn't have a lot of materials that winter. And then on the left is another picture. And wouldn't it be wonderful to gather these pictures and look at them together? Think about one artist in one place over 3 years of his life. Think through the seasons and at different times and looking at it in that way.
And I'd like to amplify a little bit here. If we can go back, yes, to Mr. Bloch's painting. The Impressionism is often glorified as the painting of the light. There's no doubt there's a lot of truth to this, but with light comes the opposite of light, shadows. And I think Pissarro was particularly obsessed by the really challenging pictorial problem of how do you represent with pigments shadows. And look at the number of shadows that the other tree, to the left of the one that obsesses Brettell, the one which has, it seems, a sort of star of different shadows coming out.
Here and all.
Just want to say something about also the intervals, the interstices, the way that almost like Matisse, Pissarro sees through things, sees in between things, and that seems to interest him almost more than the reality itself. What's a little bit of anecdote here is that the surrealists really hated Impressionism. Way too cute for them, way too realistic and so on. Brettell, the leader, the poet, the leader of the surrealist movement, had one exception, Pissarro, and especially his paintings with shadows. I find this little tidbit of information fascinating.
I totally agree. And then this picture, you think when you look at it on the screen that it's, the normal Impressionist picture size, but it's smaller. And it has this incredible compression. And what's fascinating to me is that it was painted, signed and dated in 1871, which is when Pissarro lived in Louveciennes. And so what's fascinating to me is that I know exactly where it was painted, and it was painted in Pontoise. But he didn't live in Pontoise then, and generally this building here is identified as this building, painted by Sisley on the farm. But in fact, this picture was painted in Pontoise and probably on a little trip to see whether he should go back. And it's small because he painted it on a trip, rather than being able to go back home. And so it has another wonderful little mysterious story. This is not a Bloch picture, but it's a picture that both of us have been fascinated by for a long time. It's a painting of a particular place that's in fact rather well known, and which Pissarro painted twice on a very large scale. When you go around the corner and you look at this painting, it's much bigger than the other Pissarros. It's bigger than any of the other Impressionist landscapes in the room, and it was painted for an Impressionist exhibition. But Joachim found the painting on the right, which is a little larger than the painting in Kansas City, and was painted in the same garden in the same year. And he'll tell you a little bit about where he found it.
Well, I should also tell you, here starts the Rick and Joe show, that it is thanks to Rick, who had done years and years of relentless research to try to identify which paintings were included in the 8 Impressionist exhibitions by all the Impressionists. I mean, this is like a detective work of phenomenal prowess. Let's call it what it is. And so you, Rick, had told me about this painting, which was known from a black and white caption in the Catalogue Raisonné of 1939. And I happened to be invited to look at the collection of the late Baron of Rothschild, living literally across the Palais de l'Élysée, the French White House, and a tiny street that's always blocked by security. And I come in there, and this absolutely the colors do not do justice here. What you see, unbelievable. It was one of the greatest shocks I've had. Was right in front of me, and you can imagine what I felt like. And it was one of these great moments when you're an art historian and you look for these things to come to contact with the actual work of art is one of the greatest joys we can hope to have. Unfortunately, it's almost never lent. I don't think it's been lent in our lifetimes, has it, Rick?
No, and getting a photograph, he managed to get a photograph of it. So this is an unknown picture, which is directly related to the picture in Kansas City.
Yeah, because what Rick had established is that in 1879, he's talking about the third Impressionist exhibition.
77.
77?
Yeah.
But because
Cézanne
participates in it.
Yeah, 77.
Okay.
I promise you.
Okay, no.
I'm older, so I forget more.
Pissarro had put together those two paintings, and this was one of the most ambitious, perhaps, of all the Impressionist exhibitions, wouldn't you?
And with the great Monet decoration in it, and with the huge Caillebotte that's now in Chicago, and incredible pictures of scale in this room.
So the first Impressionist exhibition is about them putting their first efforts out, and the second and the third are really where they are establishing themselves to the public eye, and they really are trying to rival, still against the salons, but on the same footage as the salon. And so these are, two of the most important Impressionist paintings, I think, of the.
And it'd be so wonderful to get them together. Yeah. It would be just wonderful. And what's even more interesting is you think Pissarro was an anarchist, and Pissarro didn't like the life of the bourgeoisie, of people with a lot of money and a lot of leisure time. He was politically opposed to it. So why does he paint these pictures? Yeah. What do they mean? Well, the answer is in the owner of the house. Here, and look at all these pictures that represent this house here is this house here by Pissarro, here by Cézanne, here by Cézanne, here by Pissarro, here by Pissarro, and here by Pissarro. So he goes all around the house, and he also does the gardens. And this is the house today. It's been somewhat improved, and it was owned by this lady who had a statue to her at one time in Pontoise, and her name was Maria de Rem. And Maria de Rem was the most famous radical feminist of the 1870s in France. And she has huge bronze statues. This is her little symbol of the equality of women, the rights of women, rich feminist, and a Freemason. She was a Freemason. And here she is during her lifetime, and this is where she lived, right around the corner from Pissarro. And she wrote her feminist sort of whatever it is, Bill of Rights, a feminist Bill of Rights. This is where she died in Paris. This is her tomb. And so it's not just a nice house with nice people who have a nice garden like those that were painted by Monet or his own house. It's the house of a radical feminist woman. And she was amazing. And she was very well known. She was much better known than Pissarro when the painting was painted. And how wonderful to kind of think about her again. And also what I love is this. I wondered what in the hell is that? And what it is a Mexican glass globe. You see them in gardens, that's what it is. And in this biography, which was written just recently, there's a story of her interest in Mexico and of the rights of women in Mexico and of a trip of her sister to Mexico who brought back this thing. So Pissarro is in this little world. It teaches you that Impressionism is about more than light. It's also about ideals.
And Pissarro, don't forget, comes from the New World himself. He's the early Impressionist, I think, isn't he?
Absolutely.
He was born in the Caribbean. He was born in today the U.S. Virgin Islands. Then it belonged to the Danish crown. So he is raised learning Spanish and Danish as his prime languages. And his first foray into the art world was with a young Danish guy who comes to St. Thomas and takes him under his wing in a way. They go to Caracas. And it is in Caracas that Pissarro begins to establish his self as destined as a professional artist. So the Hispanic world, I think, to him carried a very big importance.
And it was another relation between Maria de Rem and that. Yeah. This is a picture which I've always loved, and in fact, I have a confession to make. When I was curator of European paintings at Chicago, this painting was still owned by Mr. Pickard. I think that was his name, yes. Pickard. And I tried to buy it for the Art Institute because it's so great and because we needed a picture of this type. And fortunately for you, Mr. Pickard didn't like the idea of the picture going to Chicago, so it stayed in Kansas City. And it is directly related to one of the greatest prints made by Pissarro, of which there are many impressions, two of which were made by Gogh with Pissarro. So it's another case in which a simple painting became the occasion for a sort of collaboration in printmaking. And you have one of the impressions of this print, but it would be, and it's another wonderful thing to get them together around the picture, and then to think about Pissarro painting screens of trees. The idea of not painting what's deep in the picture, but screening that with things in front of it.
Yeah, I think I absolutely agree with Rick. I'd like to amplify, if we can go back to the Pickett painting, and you think about the problematic that we saw emerge with the Bloch painting. And here, a few years later, it sort of explodes. And the problematic of looking at shadows is transcended by something else. If you think about it, what's happening there is that he is looking at a particular motif, a village, that is basically obfuscated, that is basically concealed by rows of trees. So he's looking at something while it is almost impossible to see it. And that tension between the visible and invisible, the recognizable and the obstacle to make vision possible is a problematic that is so deeply rooted in modernity. I mean, if you think about abstraction, in a way, it's going to go that way and way further after Matisse.
And then this picture, this is in the Cleveland Museum, and it's huge, and it was painted for the Impressionist exhibition of 1879, and it is it's the next step in Pissarro's search for this idea of the screen and the thing behind. Now, this is our sadness. You know, this is here, it's not in our exhibition. And, you know, we thought about not coming.
But this painting pulled us towards it.
Exactly. We had to come and see it to make sure it was here. But it's
Can we go back
yeah,
for
sure.
a second? Because if you look at the trajectory look at the Bloch painting, then the Pickett painting, and then this one, I think there's an extraordinary kind of affirmation of the degree to which, at the extent at which he's willing to face up to pictorial challenges of a phenomenal nature. This becomes quasi, beyond the representation of the real.
And it's one of a series of vertical pictures that he painted. When he got his studio in 1892, he had a vertical window that looked west, and it looked onto screens of trees. And it's still there. The screens of trees are obviously changed, but the pictures reflect the window. He does, rather than doing horizontal landscapes out of a vertical window, he does vertical landscapes out of a vertical window, and we didn't get one of them for our exhibition. So this is another challenge for you to pull them together, because they're insanely beautiful and interesting. And what we learned in doing the exhibition about Pissarro and Erlani is that these pictures are oftentimes thought to be weak in Pissarro literature. They have less value when they come up in the auction houses. But when you put them together, they love each other, and it's like creating a family. And when we walked into the rooms in the exhibition, there were pictures that hadn't been together since they were made, and were together so happily, and kind of made you want to you would go from one to the other in this fascinating way. And I think that you could achieve that as well.
Can we, because I mean, this is the topic of our exhibition. I just want to explain a little bit what Rick is saying. If you look at this curve here, this is a little river that's not wider than this stage, and you see an angle of it here. So basically, this is almost like a fresco, like a panoramic. How do you call it when you use your iPhone and you put it on
Pano, and you go,
yes.
Pano, yeah.
So this is the kind of situation that happens with Pissarro. So indeed, what Rick is saying is deeply rooted in his own practice, in his own project. He produces these extraordinary paintings at the same time as Monet produces his so-called series. Those series are world famous, the Haystack, Art Institute of Chicago, the cathedrals, Orsay, the poplars, a little bit scattered away. But those have never been seen, as Rick is pointing out, anywhere together until the exhibition we put together. So there's a real symphonic aspect to the continuation of his playing rhythmically through the meanders of the river, and letting the river lasso through his composition and create a motif that he plays with.
And the river is the Creuse. And if Pissarro, the interesting thing is that when the Pissarros were renters because Pissarro didn't believe in private property, and so he rented. And when this came on the market, his wife, Julie Pissarro, wanted to buy it. And she knew that her husband would say no. And so she and her eldest son appealed to Monet to borrow the money to buy the farm. So Monet loaned the Pissarro family the money to buy the farm. And Pissarro, on his deathbed, was worried about repaying the loan to Monet and gave a painting to it. But what's really interesting is that same little river, the Creuse, runs through Monet's farm at Giverny. And if you got into a little boat, a little coracle here, in an hour you would be at Giverny. So the two places are deeply connected.
And it's the Epte that basically produces the water lily gardens that we all know. So the big...
Yeah, the water from Pissarro goes into Monet's pond. And then this, I mean, my God, it's so beautiful. And it's one of a series of paintings. And, you know, these are different paintings of the same motif. And how fascinating it would be to look at them together and to see the little shifts in the vehicles and in light and in time, and then to put them together with the pictures that are painted out another window in the Suite Pissarro in the Hôtel de Louvre, which are of the Avenue de l'Opéra. And then to know that this self-portrait, and you can see very clearly, that well, you can't from this stupid slide, but the Opéra is here, and this building is this building, and this was painted from the room, and guess what was happening when this was being painted? The riots after the Dreyfus affair, and after Zola wrote J'accuse, and who looks like a Jew? Pissarro. And who could not go out? Pissarro, and who, when he did go out, he was accosted by a group of young men who were yelling, "Death to the Jews." And here he is on the street trying to get to his dealer, Duranwell, which was about 5 blocks away. And he managed to get in with them and to get to Duranwell and to be safe and to be, finally able to, breathe and to get back at night. And he was trapped in this room, and you would never know it. Never. The painting on the right is in Dallas, and so I get to look at it all the time.
The painting to the left belongs to a private collection in LA. It's Aaron Spelling's collection. It's a phenomenal painting that virtually never been seen.
And if you could make a little room of the Avenue de l'Opéra and the Rue Faubourg Saint-Honoré views, all painted from the same room and with the self-portrait, which is in the DMA, the Dallas Museum of Art, right, a little plane flight away, and link all of it to the Dreyfus affair and what was going on in Pissarro's life and in French life at that time. How cool would that be?
Just a tidbit of market-related information. I mean, those works, the cityscapes, which actually brought us together again, Rick and I, when he became the director of the Dallas Museum. He hired me as a guest curator to organize the first show ever of all these cityscapes, which happened in the mid-90s and onwards until the very last day of his life. And what is noteworthy is that there is no comparison market-wise between the prices of all the paintings that we've seen from the Irani period and those. And when one of these things comes on the market, very rare as it is, it fetches around $25 million plus. Recent sale at Sotheby's brought $32 million for one of those. It's really the discrepancy. An average Irani painting, we're talking $2 or $3 million.
Yeah. And this 25.
1 to 10, basically.
Mrs. Clapper.
This is the Clapper painting, yes.
And then, this is so great because it also, when you look at a work of art and you think about the life of the artist, I mean, this is a work of art that was painted in 1871 after the Franco-Prussian War and after the siege, and just after the Commune. Manet was one of the few artists who stayed in Paris during the siege, was very malnourished and incredibly enervated and screwed up, and his doctor tells him to go sort of up to the coast to kind of make himself better, to cure himself, and this is what he paints when he gets there. And this is one of the few paintings, one of the things that you cannot, one of the most invisible things in nature is wind. You cannot paint wind, you can only paint the effect of wind. And here we are, and there's wind. And when you start realizing that there's wind, and she's holding her hat and the dress is going one way, and then these balls are moving back and forth, and there are men and women, and it's this kind of crazy, unstable world between land and sea and the gate that goes down to the beach. And the picture has, when you think about Manet's life and what Manet had been through in the year before he goes for the cure to the north, and you look at this painting, all of the suffering of that year comes through in really subtle ways. And then he returned to the motif in happier times, though not happier health-wise, in a later painting of playing croquet. Croquet was an English sport that migrated to France. And then what I was kind of urging you to do is to think about croquet and the croquet imagery. It would be really cool to do a croquet exhibition. And you can even do American art. I mean, great Winslow Homers, two of the greatest Winslow Homers, are of a little bit before, because croquet came to America through England before it went to France. And so these paintings are from the 1860s, and then to end with Bonnard in this fantastic painting, which is in the Musée d'Orsay. I was just imagining, that's when I walked through the galleries, and we were each thinking, you know, what can you do with these pictures, and how can you bring other pictures together?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Going back to the Manet painting, it's one of the most, for me, bewildering paintings.
Yeah.
I think I would almost go,
Further.
Yes, because you're absolutely right. I think it's a painting literally between death and life. You know, during the Commune in Paris, when the Prussians besiege Paris, people are literally dying of famine. They eat rats. I mean, it's one of the really dark times. That's done a few weeks later. What does he depict? A game of croquet, so futile. So, you know, it's really his return to life, but also a return to life once you just move a few hundred kilometers north or south. People don't know what's going on in Paris. And it's also a passage. France has been at war forever. The Second Empire has collapsed. The new republic, which is like very
fragile,
super fragile, with a monarchist threatening it all the time. And you look at the faces on the characters who are playing croquet. Do they look to you as though they are happy? Are they having fun? It seems to me that they are petrified with fear and threat.
I agree. I agree. And of course, these have to do with the Civil War. So it's another little subject.
Interesting.
And we both love her. Yeah. She's so enchanting. And
you found out who she was?
Her dad was the Minister of Finance in Romania, and they came to Paris for the World's Fair of 1878. And this is all in the catalog, so I just read it. My heart goes out to somebody else. And she was this little girl, and Dr. de Bellio, who was a collector of Manet and Monet and Pissarro and all of them, and who was also Romanian, and was the physician for the family, commissioned this picture from Manet. And it went home with the family to Bucharest, being the first Manet in Bucharest. And so it's a fascinating story of border crossing and who knows whom. And this little girl, Manet probably saw her twice and made her this wide-eyed little blonde girl. I mean, she's so fabulous, and she's wearing these gloves, and she's older than she is, and she's a little sexy, you know, with the sleeve down. And you think, you know, watch out for her in a few years. And then these paintings have to do with, and it's horrible to say, death, because Manet painted them generally in bed, because he couldn't get out of bed, and he had tertiary syphilis, and he was incredibly ill. And Berthe Morisot and other friends would bring him flowers and put them in vases, and he would paint them in bed with a little easel, little portable easel, and the flowers would be on a little kind of desk bed in front of him. And this is the Bloch one, but there are fabulous ones. There's a whole book, actually, on these pictures, and they're about Manet's life, and they're about Manet's death, because they're about the death of flowers, the life and brief life of a cut flower in these things. And they go back, as Manet always does, to somebody great in the past. In this case, it's Chardin. And one sees here the Clark picture and the Chardin, which is in the Louvre. And these types of pictures, bringing them together in a room, just maybe 5 of them, and imagining Manet and imagining these flowers, which were only at their peak while he was painting them, and he kept them alive.
You understand now the strategy that Rick, and it is entirely his invention, and I salute him for that, has taken, which is to take a painting from the Bloch collection, from the museum itself, as a cue for a potential project that Amy Julian might want to take on.
Exactly.
Another one, which very comes going back to Manet's incredible still lifes. They're indeed so moving, and I don't think they've ever been brought together.
Only in a book.
Only in a book, yeah. But one of the themes that I was thinking about, indeed, Manet is dying when he's doing those things, and a theme would be to look at artists who are, if not dying or paralyzed or put on their bed, and continue forcefully, willfully, never stop to produce. And the example that comes to mind is Matisse. Matisse, who in 1953-54, just before dying, produces some of the grandest body of works that he's ever produced, i.e. the cutout, the papier coupé. And to look at this suddenly made me think about the relationship, the death encroaching upon an artist produces this re-energizing moment, this rebound that produces totally unexpected results. We have another great painting here, the portrait of Paul Haviland.
By Renoir. And Paul Haviland was such a cute little boy, and Renoir was so great at painting children. It may be the greatest painter of children in the history of art, but you have these 2 paintings hanging next to each other in the galleries, and we were thinking, well, all of the Impressionists painted children, and they generally painted their own children. Renoir painted others because he did it for money, and Paul Haviland is a little Haviland, and we all know who they are. And she was a rich girl from Romania. But these are a commissioned portrait by Manet of Henri Bernstein, who became a great playwright when he was an adult, and this marvelous commissioned portrait of a de Noël daughter on the right, and Sisley painting his children studying at home on the left, and Monet painting his son on his 5th birthday at the Met. The one on the left is in Dallas, the one on the right is in the Met. And Pissarro, who dearly loved his first daughter, the first daughter who survived Jeanne, who dies shortly after these paintings were made, and he painted her 8 times. And they're so beautiful and so touching. Or the childless artists. The 3 of the greatest artists in the history of art of painting children didn't have children. And they are Cassatt, Vuillard, and Bonnard. And each of them, and wouldn't it be incredible to do an exhibition of children? Children by great artists from, Manet to Bonnard. It would be so beautiful, and and people would run to see it, and it raises all of these interesting questions about the role of the child in modern society, and growing up, and fears, and whose child is it, and relationships between mothers and children, and servants and children. These Mary Cassatts, it's almost impossible to imagine that Mary Cassatt and Vuillard and Bonnard were childless when you look at their portraits of children.
Yeah. But they were great aunts and uncles.
They were great aunts, and like me, a childless man, so you're not. So, and then, I mean, my God, this looks so great in the pastel room. And I remember it hanging in Mr. Bloch's house, and you know, there it is. And of course, it relates to a painting, and it relates to a print, and it relates to other prints. And it was part of a kind of production of images by Renoir that's really, really interesting. And Renoir is never thought of in this way. Gauguin is, and other artists. It would, you know, getting these in that little room where you take out everything else just temporarily and then only have the works that relate directly to it, and maybe works that preceded and follow it in Renoir's career.
So we were talking earlier on about the contrast between Monet's series versus Pissarro's series. Monet looks at a particular motif, a haystack, a cathedral, does it justice, 2 years, done. Pissarro moves into a little tiny village northwest of Paris, covers it over a 20-year period. Very different concept. What I think Renoir does is interesting. You've used this expression of production of images. I think that's very, very true. And again, if it's not through books, you've never seen the correlations that happen through different media. But each of these media count just as much for all these impressionists. Painting is not at the pinnacle of a hierarchic system. The print counts as much as the drawing, the pastel. And to see them all in a row, in a small room, as you have this beautiful room that you have hung together, would be a treasurable experience. And not very difficult to do.
Not very difficult to do, actually rather easy to do, except I don't know who owns the painting. We'll do a little sleuthing. This is fun because Joachim just saw the owner of the painting on the right yesterday or the day before in New York, who's a very good friend of both of ours. His name is Ivan Phillips, who lives in New York, who's from Montreal, where my wife is from. And, you know, these paintings have never been together, and they're painted several years apart on the same street, and that's Sisley's house right there. And the painting on the right is owned by Mrs. McDermott in Dallas, and it's going to come to the Dallas Museum, and it's the other way down the street. He's just turned around and is facing the other way. And there are all these pictures, including one that's owned by a gentleman from Dallas in the room, that are painted on this Route de la Princesse that goes through Marly-le-Roi, where Sisley lived. And you have one of the most beautiful of them. I mean, even having just these two to go back and forth and look at really carefully. And I'm sure Ivan would loan.
I think he would be, I can't speak for him, but delighted to that.
Yeah, and in honor of Mr. Bloch.
Yes, and he wanted me to remind you, Rick, to make sure to show a slide of his painting.
And I did. And this, you know, this is another thing that I don't know whether, I like looking at artists at the time and the places where they're least understood. And that's what we did with Pissarro and Reni. We took these pictures that nobody really particularly likes and put them together and made them make sense. And Sisley in the mid-'80s is thought to have gone completely off the rails. And he moves to Saint-Mame and he begins to paint. And there, I mean, look at this, it's so beautiful. And then you put it together with the other, I just thought of Sisley in 1885, you know, this right before the final Impressionist exhibition in which he does not exhibit. And he's all by himself east of Paris, and he paints one gorgeous thing after another, and they're all down in the market. And they're just beautiful. And he goes towards Fontainebleau, and he paints outside the forest of Fontainebleau where artists the previous generation does. And this actually is a very good slide of a gorgeous painting that looks like, you know, he's just slashing away with his wrist with every color possible in the autumn. And the pictures have a kind of nervous graphic intensity, which is really remarkable. And to use your picture as a way of pulling them together and getting us to think and see again.
this time, rather than say something of my own, I'd like to ask you a question, because the way you relate to this painting reminds me of the exhibition you did at the Clark, Painting Quickly.
Yeah.
Can you say a few words about was this
Yeah.
in it?
No, I wanted it, but I didn't know where it was. I did an exhibition. It's very fashionable in the scholarship about Impressionism to say that, oh, Impressionist pictures are really not impressions. They took a long time to paint, and oil paint is slow to dry, and there are various sessions, and scholars like John Howes and the scholars who were all of my generation, who I know or knew very well, were all into making Impressionist painting almost like academic painting. And so I decided to do an exhibition called Painting Quickly. And it was an exhibition that made us look again at pictures that were had all this improvisatory quality, because I really do believe that the roots of this idea of improvisation, which comes to its fore in the United States, and particularly in Kansas City, in jazz, is very much alive in these pictures. They're pictures in which you work on them and you don't know quite how it's going to turn out. And you're working away, and maybe it'll work and maybe it won't, and maybe it'll get muddy and maybe it won't. And this is one of the pictures. They're about gesture and color and performance. The picture is performed in front of your eyes.
And so I'd like to sum up, because we need to talk about, and I know Amy is going to show her hands very soon, and we'll...
Is it time now?
Is it? It's 7 right now, so
okay.
How many minutes do we have?
We have no minutes.
We have no minutes.
This is it. We have no questions, no minutes.
I was about to say something. What's emerged out of...
10 more minutes. Yes, no questions, but
10 more minutes, okay.
Because you're going in good direction.
I think what's coming out of what Rick is saying right now is that you've seen, it's a really interesting thing. It's, I think, the subject of a book or the subject of a doctoral dissertation, if there are students here looking for thesis, that at the time when the Impressionists are about to disband, 1885, 1886, if we can go back to the Saint-Mamès group for a second, that would be another title to the exhibition. We're not trying to ask for another job, Julian, but we're just proposing...
Yeah, don't worry. We're too expensive.
Think about Sicily, Saint-Mamès. I mean, the guy is absolutely obsessed by this little tiny village, and a little bit like Pissarro, but in a different way, different motif, different composition. He sort of explores the theme over and over under all its different facets. And what's really fascinating when you look at, let's now try to sum up, look at what Rick has pulled out of your own collection, out of the Bloch collection or the museum, is paintings that are essentially seeking relationships with those groups of work that we just brought to you for your attention through those slides. But what we've done is nothing but put together pieces of the puzzle that have been scattered around the world. And what I really find extraordinary is the way the Impressionists, each one of them, even those you never think about in those terms, like Renoir, think serially. Think through, I'm stealing those words from you, production of images. That's exactly what each one of them does, through his own vein, through his own interest, through his own particular interest. But it is something that has not really been mentioned.
No, and also, I've always wanted to do the great 1872 exhibition. Because in 1872, Pissarro and Renoir and Monet were all at an equal level in Sicily. And if you just did paintings of that year and did an exhibition of them, it would be so ravishing. And one could understand them so much better. I want to go to this. I want to go to this. Because we have a kind of argument about this, and it might be good to end with an argument. This is a glorious painting, and it was painted in Agnières. And Agnières is this town, a kind of industrial slum, really, of outside of Paris, on the Seine, right up from the Grand Jatte, which was exhibited in 1886, and the painting that led to Van Gogh's transformation. So Van Gogh comes to Paris in the spring of 1886, in time to see the Impressionist exhibition of 1886, which is dominated by the Grand Jatte. And then he goes to Agnières, right up the river. from the Grand Jatte, from the island of the Grand Jatte, and he paints picture after 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 picture. And they've never been grouped. And they are transitional. They're works that are about Van Gogh processing things that he just saw anew and was trying to kind of figure out how to make them his own. And you have one of the very best ones. And to partner with the Van Gogh Museum and really look at Agnières and look at the pictures that he made there. And I mean, it was an industrial, look at this. I mean, this could be a Seurat from the same period of time. And this is no Impressionist painted a more industrial picture than this. And then the cell portraits and all these pictures about conviviality of restaurants and things that lead to this and to the restaurants in Arles. With Joachim, look, I mean, that picture of that restaurant and the 3 other restaurants he paints inside and outside in Agnières, a place where people go. He was alone. He was alone. He was not living in Agnières, he was living in Montmartre. So he had to get all the way across Paris and bring all of his stuff with him, and there was no metro. And, think about that, and think about the production of these images after having seen things that blew his mind, and then internalizing them and creating his own gesture, his own sense of color, all of the things that were to make him into this artist.
Okay, so Rick prefaced saying that we had a major disagreement. Hearing your words, I am warming up to your answer. But the key word that Rick himself pronounced, and I absolutely agree here, is that this is a transitional period. And that is perhaps why it has not been given much attention. And transitional, you have to imagine that the guy, Van Gogh himself, comes, having lived in London, but he's already done 3 jobs, one as a pastor, failing at each one as an English teacher, and one as an art dealer. Each one is a debacle, a major, torturous failure. And he has no money. He has decided that he is a painter, is going to live through as a painter, and arrives from not Amsterdam, but Brabant, one of the provinces in the northern part of Holland, having no exposure to what's going on in Paris. And he comes, of all times, in the spring of 1886, when Paris is like a volcano in eruption, artistically speaking. A Belgian critic of the time, Verhaeren, explains that he's looking at all the galleries, and he has no sense, no idea of where the art world is going. The Impressionists are finished. We're talking about New Impressionists, but you're talking about Neo-Traditionists, Nabis, Pont-Aven School, and so on and so forth. And so you have as many schools of art in this particular moment as you've ever had at any given point in France. It's just an explosion, a revolution. He arrives there. What do you think his sense of it? A genius that he is, I'm convinced of that. What my sense is that he is trying to absorb, another term you've said, which I totally agree, he's trying to learn, to do Paris, to do French art in 1886. And he's basically doing a term that Gogh used against Pissarro. He's trying to be a chameleon, trying to do well what Seurat is doing, to do well what Gauguin is doing, to do well what Bernard is doing. But it's not his thing. And that's what my sense of resistance was against Rick. But in fact, you are convincing me. Yes, it would be. And I'm sure the Van Gogh Museum would be a great partner.
Oh, and they would love it.
Fantastic institution.
They would love it. Well, we're supposed to shut up. And we're so thankful for all of you paying so much attention. And we hope we can come back and do another Rick and Joe show, because we have many more slides.
Thank you. Thank you both.